U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned that the Treasury will not be able to pay all of the government's debt as early as June 1, if Congress does not raise or suspend the debt limit before that time. Yellen also cautioned that the U.S. defaulting on its debt obligations would produce an economic and financial catastrophe. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned that the Treasury will not be able to pay all of the government's debt as early as June 1, if Congress does not raise or suspend the debt limit before that time. Yellen also cautioned that the U.S. defaulting on its debt obligations would produce an economic and financial catastrophe, emphasizing that waiting until the last minute to take
we will be unable to continue to satisfy all of the government's obligations by early June and potentially as early as June 1st, if Congress does not raise or suspend the debt limit before that time. Last week, House Republicans narrowly passed a bill to raise the nation's debt ceiling. The measure would lift the limit by $1.5 trillion, but imposes spending cuts to the federal budget. President Biden and Democrats believe the debt limit should be raised with no conditions, making House legislation with conditions for doing so dead on arrival in the Democratic-controlled Senate and White House. CBS News has learned that the president has now called all four congressional leaders, including House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and invited them for a meeting on the debt ceiling. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins me now to decode the jockeying. So, Scott, the White House position is no negotiations over the debt limit as a matter of principle. Debt limit is too important. Are any Democrats pressuring the White House, the president, to drop that posture and just start negotiating?
There's a little bit of that, but not much, John. There's one U.S. senator, one Democratic senator, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who said the president should sit down and negotiate. It's not clear how much of a leverage piece that is for Republicans, because Joe Manchin is notoriously a Democratic senator in a very red state. He's up for re-election next year, and he has been mercurial politically on some of the Biden administration's priorities. Not totally unexpected. The other moderate Democratic senators, those who tend to build bridges on very difficult pieces of legislation, say, yeah, he should sit down and talk about deficits, about reducing the crippling deficits in the future, but not on the debt ceiling. They're joining the Biden administration argument, John, that this is a binary situation. You do or you don't negotiate over this at all, and they're saying it's too dangerous to do so.
Okay, let's say the White House blinks. Though, as you say, there's no evidence they're thinking about that at the moment, but that would lead to negotiations, and negotiations usually lead to compromises. So then the question is, let's imagine in this fantasy world that there are these compromises. Could House Speaker Kevin McCarthy get enough votes, given how thin his margin is, and how difficult would that be given the way things are right now?
That's the critical question over the next 30 days till that deadline, because over the past 96 hours, some reality has become clear to all stakeholders here that whatever is going to pass the U.S. House, controlled by Republicans, and pass the U.S. Senate, controlled by Democrats, is going to have some new political complexion we've yet to see this Congress. Some combination of Democrats and Republicans. There's no other way to get it through both chambers. And until that group announces or reveals itself, the mystery is, what could pass the U.S. House that the president would sign and the Senate would approve? If Speaker McCarthy were to bring back some watered-down version of the thing he got narrowly through the House by just one vote last week, it would fail if it was going to get Republican votes only. There's going to have to be a new group that forms over the next 30 days to prevent an economic disaster, and we're not sure who's in it, how many members of each side, or when they will finally pull the trigger.
Very tricky thing to do, particularly for Kevin McCarthy, to have a compromise when compromise is seen by some of his members as capitulation. Scott MacFarlane in Washington, thanks.
I can, assuming that our president and the Schumer Senate recognize the gravity of the problem. This is no longer about politics. We have passed a debt ceiling solution. We will not, House Republicans will not allow America to default on its debt. We showed that last week. The solution is in the Senate right now. Again, you pass that solution, that solves the problem. But by the way, Where the president's going to get into it with the House is going to be over the appropriations process, because this is not the end of the job. We're moving into appropriation seasons. We've got some major bills to pass, and we've got to be looking at all the spending across this entire government. This is just one piece. And I might remind everybody, Donna, that in the last 30 years, the only real significant spending reforms that have been negotiated by Democrats and Republicans came out of debt ceiling negotiations. President Biden himself said that this was what you have to do back in 2011. Nancy Pelosi said in 2019, you can't do a no strings attached deal. Again, Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans have given you the solution. The Schumer Senate should take it up and pass it. And if you don't like it, then I suppose your next step is to start to talk to our speaker and tell him what you would like to change so that you make sure we don't default on our debt. House Republicans have already done that.
Let me just quickly look deep inside what you did get passed this past week. The bill would cut all non-defense discretionary funding by 22%. That is a lot of money. And I want you to look at what the administration said it would mean just for your home state of Minnesota. Thousands would lose food, they say, rental assistance. They would pay more for college. Outpatient VA appointments for veterans could be cut. This will make a big difference if what you want, this bill, actually would become law. Big difference in the lives of Americans, especially those living paycheck to paycheck. What do you say to them?
Well, I actually challenge it. You know, you've got a president who is just told by the Washington Post that his claims on the deficit get 22 Pinocchios. They're just not true. And what you just said is just not true either, because you should scrutinize what the administration is talking about. What we did was you go back to FY22 baseline budgeting, Donna. That's just 4 months ago. That's just last year. And the budgeting, the level we're talking about, was passed by Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. So to suggest that House Republicans are doing something now, when you passed it just last year, and this was the numbers you were living under, that just isn't accurate. What this would do is this would be transformational. It would put this country on a trajectory where we can start to address our budget deficit. We're spending $1.29 for every dollar we're bringing in, Dana. This does not end well unless we start to fix this problem. So
just to underscore before we go, the cuts that I just laid out came from the administration. This is what they claim. You're saying that just is not true? And this is a hypothetical, theoretical question, because what you passed, as we said, is ultimately not going to become the law of the land, but these are very specific cuts that they put out there. Again, I know that's your opinion. I would hope this becomes the law of the land. And the use of cuts, these are spending reforms. And all we're doing is going back to the Biden-Pelosi budget of last year, that limit. And then with Joe Manchin's suggestion, limiting growth over the next decade by 1% annually. That's entirely reasonable. And by the way, we aren't having any substance coming from the White House, Joe Biden, or Chuck Schumer's Senate saying, look, this is what we should do to solve the debt ceiling. Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans have given you the roadmap of how to do that. Okay. You don't have any ideas? Let's pretend